Hi. So today we'll be talking about diffuse parenchymal lung disease, which is the newer term for interstitial lung diseases. They are a group of diseases which cause fibrosis and inflammation of the lung parenchyma. It is a varied group with more than 150 diseases. It's also a very difficult disease to treat. It's actually much easier to teach, but most people have difficulty in diffuse parenchymal lung diseases. So basically I think it will be most easier if you could think of some scenarios and try to fit your patient into one of those scenarios. It is basically an HRCT diagnosis. DPLD is an HRCT diagnosis. There is no single diagnostic tool. So in most textbooks you can see that it is a CRP diagnosis. It is a clinico-radiological and a pathological diagnosis. And the classification treatment continue to evolve, and the major differentials is infections, pulmonary edema and neoplasms. Any talk about interstitial lung disease is incomplete without talk of secondary pulmonary lobule. This is a small anatomic subunit of the lung which consists of one terminal bronchiole, and there are about 5 to 10 acini from the terminal bronchiole. So what is in the center of this? This blue thing is the centrilobular artery or centrilobular pulmonary artery. So, and in the interlobular septa, the yellow color you can see here, run the pulmonary vein. So this is the pulmonary vein running in between the two septa. Most of the pathology in the lung about interstitial lung disease is concentrated in the secondary pulmonary lobule. So here also you can see in a CT scan the secondary pulmonary lobule is marked. It is around 1 to 2 centimeters. You can see the red thing is the centrilobular area and the yellow lines mark the interlobular septa. Maybe we'll go into more detail at a later lecture. Diffuse parenchymal lung diseases is easily classified like this of known etiology like hypersensitivity pneumonitis, which sometimes is caused by dust, farmer's lung, mushroom worker's lung. There are varied names for it based on the etiology. The next is drugs. Some collagen vascular diseases causing DPLD are present. Next is idiopathic interstitial pneumonias, which is the major chunk of diseases in the DPLD. Then there are granulomatous DPLD, of which the classical prototype is sarcoidosis, and there are other forms of DPLD. This is eosinophilic pneumonia, lymphangioliomyomatosis and histiocytosis X. We'll be basically concentrating on idiopathic interstitial pneumonias. The most difficult part of learning interstitial lung diseases is to learn all these short forms. So basically if you learn the short forms and a clinical scenario, it becomes much easier. The chronic fibrosing variants of idiopathic interstitial pneumonia are idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and non-specific interstitial pneumonia. Then there are smoking related ILDs. There is a debate telling about whether to take this out of this idiopathic interstitial pneumonia because there is an etiology here. But at present it is still retained into an idiopathic interstitial pneumonia subtype. And the two diseases which are in this are respiratory bronchiolitis interstitial lung disease and desquamative interstitial pneumonia, DIP. The next subtype is acute or subacute pattern of presentation, which is acute interstitial pneumonia and cryptogenic organizing pneumonia. There are also other very rare IIPs. So basically the terminology, there are more terminology about the pathology of these diseases which will be coming in later slides. So this is the latest ATS classification about major idiopathic interstitial pneumonias, which we have just now talked upon. These two are the chronic fibrosing types. This is the smoking related ILDs, RBILD and DIP. COP and AIP are the acute or subacute patterns of idiopathic interstitial pneumonias. So Now coming to the basics of idiopathic interstitial pneumonias. Basically, all of these subtypes have classical pathological diagnosis also. So you just need to familiarize yourself with the terms. We'll be going into detail later, but idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis is a clinical diagnosis. That same diagnosis has a pathological diagnosis. The pathologist will call it as usual interstitial pneumonia. In a case of desquamative interstitial pneumonia, which we saw that it was smoking related, the pathological diagnosis is also same. In RBILD also, the pathological diagnosis will be the same. Next is the acute interstitial pneumonia. There, the pathologist will diagnose it as diffuse alveolar damage. Just think over one other disease where diffuse alveolar damage is the pathological diagnosis. We'll come into that also later. So NSIP has the same pathological diagnosis of non-specific interstitial pneumonia. So we already learned about the two terminologies of interstitial lung diseases. So basically, idiopathic interstitial pneumonia or IIP is a subset of ILD, and IPF, desquamative interstitial pneumonia, respiratory bronchiolitis associated interstitial lung diseases, acute interstitial pneumonia and non-specific interstitial pneumonia are all subtypes of idiopathic interstitial pneumonia. So what is the most important distinction to make? It is basically to differentiate UIP or IPF, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, versus everything else. Why? Because the treatment is entirely different. The prognosis is entirely different with UIP and everything else. The prognosis of UIP is actually very bad. Complete recovery is possible if diagnosed early in all other types of idiopathic interstitial pneumonia. So a diagnosis of UIP probably implies that there is no need for a biopsy, and treatment is unlikely of any benefit, and the patient has poor prognosis. Coming to one term which is frequently used in ILD is ground glass opacity. Ground glass opacity is basically a haziness or whitish patches through which we can see the vessels. Here you can see that there is a consolidation. You cannot see the underlying vessels because it is obscured by the consolidation. But here you can see that the underlying whitish vessels are also seen. So this is a ground glass opacity and this is a consolidation. So we already learned that it is a clinico-radiological and pathologic diagnosis. We also learned about subtypes of IIP. So first we'll come to the first diagnosis of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which is called by the pathologist as usual interstitial pneumonia. The classical patient who comes with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, always which I have seen, have a cough usually of 6 months duration. He'll be an elderly male patient who is a smoker, and these symptoms would be gradually progressive over the period of weeks to months. This is a classical picture of a patient with IPF. It was previously called cryptogenic fibrosing alveolitis because of similar pathology. Basically, it is due to aberrant repair mechanism. A patient who is more than 50, who is a male smoker, comes with insidious onset of dyspnea. Usually, and the X-ray would be normal in the initial stages of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Although it is idiopathic, some evidence of viral infections like Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, there is some evidence that these viruses could be an etiological trigger for IPF, although it is not proven. Clinical examination, you can see that the patient would be at least mildly tachypneic. And if you ask the patient to walk across the room and come back, he'll be out of breath. Why? Because patients with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, after exercise, they increase their respiratory rate more than their tidal volume. A normal person, once they go for an exercise and come back, they'll be increasing their tidal volume and their respiratory rate. In IPF, what you can see is mostly they'll be increasing their respiratory rate after and during exercise. And the classical clinical finding would be Velcro crackles. Velcro crackles are fine, late inspiratory crackles, which are usually found in the lung bases. And there is not much of change with coughing also. On physical examination, 40 to 75% of patients have clubbing. PFTs, as expected, because this is a restrictive lung disease, cause restriction, and the DLCO, diffusion lung capacity of carbon monoxide, would be reduced. Clubbing is classically seen in IPF more than other idiopathic interstitial pneumonia. So, since it is a CT diagnosis, what are the other differential diagnoses which can cause similar findings on clinical examination and on CT? The other differential diagnoses are asbestosis. So always a history of asbestos exposure should be inquired when a patient is diagnosed with IPF. Collagen vascular diseases induced ILD can present similar to IPF, and the classical collagen vascular disease is scleroderma, which presents exactly like IPF. Drug toxicity and patients with chronic HP. Although chronic HP is slightly more not towards the lung base, it is slightly over the lung epiphysis. Sometimes it can mimic IPF. So IPF is usual interstitial pneumonia in the absence of cause. So you need to exclude these causes before labeling a patient as IPF. We saw earlier that IPF can sometimes initially present even with a normal X-ray. There will be only subtle clinical signs of Velcro crackles and mild dyspnea, but patients who have progressed would have peripheral reticular opacities which are more prominent in the lung base than in the lung apex. You can see the bases are always more involved in IPF or UIP. On CT diagnosis also, it is basal. This is the lung base. So you can see that there are multiple basal cysts are also present, and these are the honeycombing seen in the lung base. Honeycombs are basically cysts which are of varied sizes. Some are large and some are smaller, and they are stacked one upon the other. So they share their walls. So they share their walls and they are stacked one upon the other, and this is classical honeycombing. So this is marked honeycombing in end stage UIP or IPF. If the clinical and radiological findings are consistent and suggest IPF, a diagnosis can be made without a biopsy. This is the only idiopathic interstitial pneumonia where a biopsy is not required for a diagnosis. All other cases of idiopathic interstitial pneumonias require a biopsy prior to diagnosis. So these are the 4 features which, if present, you need not go in for a biopsy. Subpleural and basal predominance, reticular abnormalities in which the interlobular septa would be affected, honeycombing with or without traction bronchiectasis. These are the traction bronchiectasis this is actually not true bronchiectasis. Because of the fibrosis, the bronchi are stretched out and they appear as traction bronchiectasis. So that is another feature, honeycombing with or without traction bronchiectasis, and absence of features inconsistent with UIP. That means if the patient has upper lobe predominant disease, if the patient has multiple centrilobular nodules, if the patient has consolidation, those are not typical of UIP pattern. The confirmatory diagnosis is pathological, and basically, just like the name suggests, there is marked pulmonary fibrosis in biopsy. So there will be fibroblastic foci with very little inflammation, and the areas of interspersed normal lung is classical of IPF. You can see that in the specimen there are dry lungs which are shriveled. These whitish areas are the areas of fibrosis, and classically on histopathology, there are areas of fibrosis here with areas of normal alveoli interspersed. So this is basically called temporal heterogeneity. So that means that some areas will have fibrosis, whereas some areas would be spared. That is in brief about the clinical, radiological and pathological features of IPF. Now what is the treatment? This is where the problem starts. There is not much of treatment. The only 3 drugs I would like to talk to you about, one is even not a drug, are pirfenidone, nintedanib and lung transplantation. Pirfenidone is an anti-fibrotic, anti-inflammatory oral medicine which is used for IPF. I have personally used it, and it basically reduces the fibrosis of IPF. Although the results are not very easy to obtain, and it is also, there are also many adverse effects, like you need to monitor the liver function, you need to gradually only upscale the dosage. You start with 200 milligram TDS of an oral tablet of pirfenidone. You need to check for liver function test every weekly at least, and gradually increase, and the final dose should be at least 800 milligram 3 times a day. The problem is most patients will have adverse effects or intolerance, basically nausea, diarrhea, mainly GI intolerance, liver dysfunction, when pirfenidone is given as 800 milligram thrice daily, and it is a lifelong treatment also. Nintedanib is another drug which is a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. It inhibits the vascular endothelial growth factor, platelet derived growth factor and fibroblast growth factor. It's a triple growth factor inhibitor. The dosage is 150 milligram BD. The problem here also is that the patient has to take this lifelong. The per month cost at present would be around 50,000 to 60,000 rupees per month the patient has to pay for this medicine. And the other treatment option, which is sparingly only used in our country, is lung transplantation. In lung transplantation, double lung transplant is always preferred over single lung transplant. The prognosis even after lung transplant is very bad, and lung transplantation for an idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis has a worse prognosis than a lung transplantation for most other diseases, like for instance an end-stage COPD patient who has a lung transplant will have a better prognosis than an IPF patient who undergoes lung transplantation. Basically, IPF has a very poor prognosis. The mean survival after 5 years would be about 20 to 30% only of the patients would survive after 5 years. The median survival would be around 2 to 3 years. So it's a very bad diagnosis to have. Many patients, once you make a diagnosis, they only tell, oh, it's not lung cancer, thank God. But the problem is IPF has a worse prognosis than many malignancies, even many lung malignancies.
It's idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. The next constellation of symptoms and the case scenario I want to talk to you about is a female who is around 30 to 40-year-old age, and she's a non-smoker. She comes predominantly with extrapulmonary manifestations, maybe some hematuria, RBCs in the urine, some peripheral neuropathy, multiple mononeuritis multiplex. Such a patient who comes with gradual increase in breathlessness or cough, you do an X-ray and then a CT scan, and this is the classical CT finding in a patient. Here you can see that this is the pleura. The area just adjacent to the pleura, that is the subpleural area, is relatively spared compared to what is more inside. So this subpleural sparing, these areas are relatively spared, and this subpleural sparing, and there are some traction bronchiectasis here, some ground glass opacities and some reticular opacities. What you can see is there is absence of honeycombing. In the other case we saw that there were subpleural, basal, multiple honeycomb cysts were there. which is characteristically absent in this disease, which is non-specific interstitial pneumonitis. This is a less chronic disease than UIP, and the age is around 40 to 50 years. It occurs predominantly in non-smokers and in females, in contrast to the IPF. The patients have dyspnea, cough, and occasional fever, and clubbing is rare, also unlike IPF. The PFTs predictably show a restrictive pattern. And this is the most common ILD to complicate connective tissue disorders. That means if you diagnose a patient with NSIP on CT scan and clinically, what you need to search for is whether the patient has any underlying connective tissue disorders. And this is a very important and a practically useful set of minimum investigations which are to be done in a patient with NSIP, and always this is done by me in any case which is suspected of NSIP. ANA, rheumatoid factor, JO1, SCL70 and anti-CCP are the minimum investigations to be done. Based on the pathology, there are three types. Cellular, which has a pathology predominantly which is cellular, fibrotic, and mixed is a mixture of both of this. X-ray may be normal in early diseases, and in this disease also, like IPF, it is predominantly basal, although it extends into the apex also. Unlike IPF, which is always basal, here there is an apico-basal gradient is there of disease progression. Here you can see some reticular opacities, and the other main finding you can see here is ground glass opacities. Ground glass opacities predominantly over the bilateral lung base is seen. And here you can see some traction bronchiectasis. Here there is a traction bronchiectasis. So these are the classical CT imaging of NSIP, and what you can see is honeycombing is absent. And the fibrosis in NSIP is temporally homogeneous, in contrast to IPF, where there was temporal heterogeneity. Here there is temporally homogeneous. That means if you see a section under microscope, there are no interspaced normal lung. The whole lung will be replaced with inflammation and fibrosis. This has a better prognosis than IPF. So that is the case scenario we saw for an NSIP pattern, an idiopathic NSIP pattern where a female comes with extrapulmonary manifestations. In the next case scenario, we'll see a person, male and equal, females have equal predominance of this disease. A person who is in the mid 40s or 50s, they come with acute onset of dyspnea. In the previous two diseases, IPF and NSIP, we saw that the dyspnea and cough progress over months. In this disease though, the disease progresses over days to maybe a few weeks. This patient gradually becomes out of breath, and by the time he comes to the hospital, sometimes he would even be oxygen dependent. On a CT scan, we would see a pattern similar to another disease also, which presents even more acutely. And what I would like to simplify is, I always think of acute interstitial pneumonia as a subacute variant of ARDS. Although that is not a correct terminology, you should not use that for any exams, but basically it is subacute ARDS. ARDS, you know, from the triggering factor or the inciting event, the breathlessness and the bilateral infiltrates has to happen in 7 days. But that pattern, that acuteness is not seen in this disease, but it is subacute, so it takes days to weeks. And on CT scan, there is extensive ground glass opacities, traction bronchiectasis, extensive consolidation. And the disease I am talking about is acute interstitial pneumonia, or the pathological variant or the pathological diagnosis is diffuse alveolar damage. This is also classified as a type of idiopathic ARDS, and disease was first diagnosed or identified by Hamann and Rich, and hence it's called Hamann and Rich syndrome. So the patient has an acute onset of respiratory distress, usually in their 4th or 5th decade. Many patients have fever also. Some patients have gradually increasing deoxygenation, hypoxia, hypoxemia, and there are diffuse symmetric ground glass opacities with slight peripheral predominance. In CT also, in the most severe forms, you can see that air bronchograms. This is the consolidation, and inside that you can see the air bronchogram. And according to guidelines, this disease has a rapidly progressive course. You need to exclude ARDS. The pathology is diffuse alveolar damage. A radiological finding should be consistent with ILD, and there should be an absence of chronic lung disease. It has a very poor prognosis, and just like ARDS, it has an exudative, fibroproliferative and fibrotic phase. The classical finding on histopathology are these hyaline membranes. The hyaline membranes are basically eosinophilic debris, and also they consist of protein, fibrin and many cells. And this is the characteristic of acute interstitial pneumonia. These patients have a very poor prognosis, with many patients dying also. So that was an easy case scenario. And next, there are 2 case scenarios which I think it would be easier if they are taken together. Those are RBILD, that is respiratory bronchiolitis interstitial lung disease, and desquamative interstitial pneumonitis. If you learn that RBILD and DIP are a spectrum of the same disease, I think of it as RBILD as someone who's smoked in their lifetime but not much, and a person who has DIP has smoked much more than a patient with RBILD. So, the clinical features also and the radiological findings would be similar, but they will be much more in DIP than RBILD. So DIP is a very severe form of RBILD. That is an easy way to remember. On CT scan, you can see that there are multiple centrilobular nodules, and maybe you can see some cysts also. This disease is diagnosed in smokers who are usually more than 30 pack years. They come with insidious onset of dyspnea, dry cough. The X-ray shows bilateral ground glassing, and the radiological findings have irregular, ill-defined ground glass and centrilobular nodules, which are mid to upper lung predominant. Unlike in NSIP or IPF, where it is lower lobe predominant, here it is upper and mid zone predominant. Histopathology, you can see pigmented macrophages, which are otherwise called as smokers macrophages. Here you can see that there are diffuse ground glass opacities. These are the ground glass opacities where you can see the vessels also going in this, and there is some whitishness, and there are multiple centrilobular nodules. This is a nodule, this is a nodule, this is a nodule. There are multiple centrilobular nodules, and here mainly it is a ground glass pattern. And to easily remember DIP, you just remember that all these ground glass opacities increase are of a more prominent pattern in DIP. Here also most patients are smokers. The pulmonary function test predictably cause restriction, although because the patient is a smoker, there can be obstruction also in some patients with DIP. Radiological findings, it is a more progressive or more severe form of RBILD. There are diffuse ground glass opacities on chest X-ray and CT. CT also, in comparison to the previous disease, you can see that the disease is more extensive. The pathology is the same. You can see pigmented macrophages, and the other associations which are seen with desquamative interstitial pneumonia are marijuana smoking, diesel fume, beryllium, fire extinguisher powder. Now we'll see the last case scenario, which is a patient who has taken multiple courses of antibiotics. The usual history would be around 2 months. The patient has gone to multiple doctors, they've all prescribed antibiotics. The sputum gram stain culture is sterile, but the patient has persistent fever and maybe persistent symptoms also. Fever need not be persistent, and this, you do a CT scan, the X-ray might have some irregular infiltrates, usually predominantly bilateral and peripherally, and the CT scan, you can see that this is a peculiar sign. I'm sure many of you would have guessed. This is a reverse halo sign. Here, the center of the consolidation is less dense and the periphery is more dense. In halo sign, it will be the opposite. The center will be very dense and the periphery will be less dense. Here, there is a reverse halo sign. You can see there is ground glassing in the center and consolidation in the periphery, which is found in 20% of patients with cryptogenic organizing pneumonia. This is a disease which dominates the air spaces and not the interstitium. Although it is classified as an interstitial lung disease, the disease predominantly affects the air spaces. Previously, it was called as bronchiolitis obliterans organizing pneumonia, although the term is now outdated. It usually occurs in non-smokers. We already saw that it is associated with fever, cough, and patient would have multiple antibiotics prior to presentation. What are the other causes of organizing pneumonia? Some drugs, some connective tissue disorders, radiotherapy, lung or bone marrow transplant are the most common differential diagnosis in a case of organizing pneumonia. And just like in a case of NSIP, always CTD has to be excluded in a patient with organizing pneumonia before labeling it as cryptogenic organizing pneumonia. This is the classical X-ray also. Many patients are treated for tuberculosis. I have seen one patient treated for tuberculosis. Here you can see that there are bilateral peripheral patchy infiltrates on X-ray. The reverse halo sign is otherwise called as Etolle sign. The bronchoalveolar lavage shows predominantly lymphocytes, and on pathology you can see fibroblasts, myofibroblasts in a connective tissue matrix. To summarize, we have seen all these case scenarios. We saw IPF as a patient who was in their late 60s, who was a smoker, who came with clubbing, and the CT showed classical features of bilateral basal predominance, reticular abnormalities, honeycombing with or without traction bronchiectasis. Those patients, even without a biopsy, were diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. The only drugs which are used at present are nintedanib and pirfenidone, and the only other treatment option is lung transplantation. I will add that always these patients should be given vaccinations. Proton pump inhibitors are prescribed rampantly, although there is no definite evidence. There are some evidence only telling that IPF may be exacerbated due to gastroesophageal reflux disease. That is why many doctors prescribe proton pump inhibitors in a patient with IPF. Also, one other drug which is used often is N-acetylcysteine, although there is no definite evidence to support the use of N-acetylcysteine or proton pump inhibitors in a patient with IPF. The next case scenario we saw was a patient, female patient in her 40s or late 30s, presenting with extrapulmonary manifestations. You saw the CT scan, there was a classical subpleural sparing. You investigated the patient for for connective tissue disorders. I hope you remember the minimum investigations which are required in a patient with NSIP pattern. These patients can be treated with corticosteroids with or without azathioprine. Then we came to the smoking related ILDs, where RB-ILD had a less severe involvement of the lung, and desquamative interstitial pneumonias had a more severe involvement of the lung. They are both responsive to smoking cessation. So, as treatment, the first and most important thing to tell your patient is to stop smoking, and in many cases, just with smoking cessation, the radiological features and the patient's clinical symptoms improve just on smoking cessation. And last, we saw acute interstitial pneumonia, where the patient comes with a subacute form of ARDS, where the patient has progressive breathlessness, patient has bilateral extensive ground glass opacities consolidation, the patient might be hypoxemic, and the patient has a very poor prognosis in acute interstitial pneumonia. The pathological diagnosis in an acute interstitial pneumonia is diffuse alveolar damage. And last, we saw cryptogenic organizing pneumonia, where the patient has a 2-month history of multiple antibiotics with non-resolution. This patient on radiological examination on X-ray shows bilateral peripheral infiltrates, CT showed Etolle sign or a reverse halo sign. This disease is also responsive to steroids. So, in a patient with cryptogenic organizing pneumonia also steroids may be prescribed. So now to end this discussion, there is one question. I know that this will be a very difficult question, but just try to answer it. A 44-year-old female smoker who works in a pet shop. In her leisure time, she sculpts stones, but despite suffering from cough and dyspnea on exertion, she never wears a particulate filter, that means a mask. Her lung function test basically does not reveal much. That means there is no definite obstruction or restriction. Her allergy test is positive for dust mites and for cat and horse epithelial allergens. Her bronchoalveolar lavage fluid contains enough cells with 84% macrophages. Transbronchial biopsy was not representative. So a pet shop is there, she is a smoker, she has dyspnea and 84% macrophages and an allergen test positivity. So this was her X-ray on presentation. Now let us come to the next X-ray. This is the X-ray of the same patient after some intervention. So which of the following interventions may have caused the clinical improvement and change in radiograph? You may pause the video and think over it. So let's discuss the answers one by one. Avoidance of dust exposure. Okay, that seems to be a very logical answer, especially because the patient has a pet shop and she has an allergy test positivity for dust mites and for cat and horse epithelial allergens. The only downside being no allergen test positivity is specific for hypersensitivity pneumonitis. You must be thinking of hypersensitivity pneumonitis. And another more classical thing is in hypersensitivity pneumonitis, the macrophages would not be so high. It will be a predominantly lymphocytic bronchoalveolar lavage. Pirfenidone is an unlikely cause of this much of improvement. One, because this is only a chest X-ray diagnosis. IPF should never be diagnosed without an HRCT. Second, unlike IPF, this has a upper lobe predominant lesion. Upper and mid zone is predominant. The lower zones are not actually involved in this case. So pirfenidone is unlikely to be the answer. So, and the same goes for infliximab. Azathioprine, also this patient, okay, if the patient has NSIP, the lesion should have been in the lower lobes. The patient does not have any extrapulmonary manifestations. So azathioprine also seems to be an unlikely answer. The correct answer is smoking cessation, and the diagnosis, although there is no HRCT available in such a patient who is a smoker and has a BAL macrophages, 84% macrophages, which is more likely to be pigmented macrophages, or otherwise called the smoker's macrophages. And the only intervention usually required is to stop smoking. Steroids will help to hasten this process but is not essential. Now the next question I want to ask is, what is this sign? So this is a place in the Pacific Ocean. Here you can see a central water body, and surrounding it is a coral reef. So there is a coral reef and a central water body. So this is more dense and this is less dense. This ring-shaped coral reef, which surrounds a central body of water, usually this occurs once a volcano has erupted. Many millions of years ago, there would have been a volcano here, and it has erupted and has caused this clearing. So this is the atoll sign, which is this is not the atoll sign actually, this is the atoll, and this is why the atoll sign got its name, which is also called the reverse halo sign, which is seen in cryptogenic organizing pneumonia. We already saw the pictures of the same previously. Thank you so much.